Okay, so finally, we are going to get to work on the body of this object. So I'm going to go to polygons mode, and I'm going to make sure I have all of my polygons selected. And I want to make sure that this has been set to frontal projection. So I'm just going to go ahead and say projection. I'm going to aim the camera something like this and hit frontal. And be really confused as to what's going on and why this is acting up again. Oh, I have, for some reason, the round button tag was still selected, so I'm going to make sure I have the right tag selected. Okay, so somehow I had accidentally clicked on the lock icon up here. So when I was trying to use the buttons over here, it was not updating to the object that I was on, right? So if that happens, just make sure that you check this little icon. All right, so I'm on the body, and I need to start peeling this apart. And we're going to need several islands and several scenes, and we need to figure out how we're going to make that work. And so one of the things we're going to start by doing is saying, part of it would be how the object that you're modeling is going to make a big determination in terms of on these corners, and let me switch my display. There we go. On these corners, do I want all these edges attached to this face? Do I want them attached to the sides? Where do I want to make the cuts to unwrap this thing, right? Because this is, even though it's got holes, it's technically a watertight object. And we're going to need to do some work to get that to function well and be something that we can easily work on. And there's some of these areas where there's what I'm going to say are like more challenging surfaces, and we might want to cut those away from the rest of the object in order to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get started. And let's say we want to start with this object, this front face. And I'm not going to select any other rounding on here. I think I'm going to leave that for the other objects, just so we can get started with something reasonably simple. So what I do want to do is I want to select this polygon, and I want to hold down Shift and select this polygon. And I just want to go ahead and click UV Unwrap. And when I do that, I get what at first looks like an okay result. But when I look up here at this hole here, it is totally and completely distorted. Right? If I was to go turn back on my shading, you should see a lot of warping happening here, and then this is actually rotated at its side as well. So neither of those things are what we want. So I'm going to undo that action. And we're going to do a trick here in order to get these to be aligned to the way we want them to. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to rotate our view so that the front of the camera faces the camera. Right? Okay, so the front of the camera is facing the camera. I can select both of these polygons again. And then I want to look at my orientation. Y is up and X is to the right. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my 4 views. I'm going to look for one where Y is up and X is to the right. Right here, Y is up and X is to the left. So what I want to do is I want to say, okay, well, it's not the back. I need it to be the front view. So I'm going to go to Cameras and switch from back to front and zoom in a little bit. And then what I can do at this point is now I can do what's called a frontal projection. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to my projection, and I'm just going to click on frontal. And what that does is it very cleanly orients this and makes sure there's no distortion. And so now when I look at these numbers, right? They're aligned, everything is happy and good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and use the move tool. I'm going to hit the letter E. I'm going to pull this up out of the way, and I'm just going to go to select, hide selected. Okay, and what's nice now is we haven't really seen this in the other ones, but as we get rid of planes, because we have solo mode on, if I had solo mode off, we would still see everything, I think. But because I have these things set, we just see the geometry that we have left. So let's go ahead and look at what else we have to do. So this is another one that's got a hole in it, and that's, again, going to potentially be problematic. Now, with this one, what I think we should do is, let's just go ahead and take all the rounding on this one too, because I want to show you how we'll deal with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our top polygon. So I'm going to use the letter, I can use the move tool, I could use the live selection tool. And then what we need to do is change our display so we can actually see. There we go. And I'm going to use the grow selection command to see if I can grow my selection to select all of those additional polygons I need to select. So I'm going to go ahead. I could also probably use loop and then fill. So let's try that first, actually. So I'm going to hit the letter U, the letter L. I'm going to hold down, I can loop this. So I'm going to hold down Shift, select that, and then I'm going to hit U and F. And now I can fill in the rest of that selection, right? So this is another quick and easy way to select all of those things. So I've got these selected. So now I'm going to rotate my view until this plane is facing the camera. The Z is up, the X is to the side, to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and say, Z is up, X is to the side. Let's go ahead and that's my perspective view. Here we go. Here's the top view. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to do a frontal projection. And now I have something that I need to do. If I was to go ahead and at this point, right, with this frontal projection, there's going to be, these are not proportionally sized, right? They're squished together because we're looking straight down on the object. And we want these to be spread out more. So I'm going to be like, I should probably do a UV unwrap. Now, if I do that, things go very, very sideways very, very quickly, right? So that's not what we want in any way, shape, or form. And even, I can tell you from experience, even if I go in and I cut these corners, that center shape is still going to be totally distorted. So what I want to do is I want to come in here and be in polygons mode, and I just want to select this center polygon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something called the pin UV pins. And so I'm going to add some UV pins to this, which will pin this in place while I'm able to open up and manipulate the other parts. So what I'm going to do is I've selected that center polygon. I'm going to hold down Command or Control, and I'm going to click on Points Mode. When I do that, it's going to select all of the points for that top polygon. So it's going to select these internal ones and those external ones. I could also have just gone to Points Mode and loop selected the outside polygon points and these points, but this is a faster way to do that. I'm going to click Add UV Pins, which should pop these up in red. If it doesn't, you can click off of it, click back on it, and they'll show up in red. And once I've done that, I'm going to go back to Polygons mode. I'm going to double click to make sure I have all the polygons in that selection set. I'm going to zoom in on a corner just so I can kind of see what happens, because this is a oblong thing. And I'm going to go ahead and hit UV unwrap. And as soon as I do that, this whole thing expands. And you'll see that my interior stuff has stayed the same, but clearly I'm having some issues with the geometry on the side. So I'm going to go to Relax UV. I have selected sides already on. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm also going to check mark the pinpoint selection. I think I should be good just with this. So let's go ahead and go to Edges. And I'm going to go to the Move tool just because it's easier. And I'm going to try here and just see what happens. So I'm going to cut those. I'm going to hit UV Unwrap. it goes a little bit, it jumped way down here, but that's probably, that's at least a good sign that something correct is happening. I am going to undo that though, and try and center my view again. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to actually try cutting it here and see if there's much of a difference in terms of how this works. So I've got UV unwrap. Yeah, it doesn't really seem to matter. They're still scaled strangely. So I'm going to go ahead and just, oops, hold down Shift and cut there as well. And I'm going to say, I can do UV relax. There we go. This is with the LSCM. I clicked it down here, which cleaned that up a lot. So let's go ahead and which ones did I select on the other side? Don't know. Oh, the vertical ones. Come down here. Shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click, and while I'm at it, to speed things up a little bit, rather than do this, because I think this is going to work really well, I am going to go ahead and shift click to select all of these. And I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And now that I've done that, I've actually got a pretty nice, evenly shaped object that it looks like needs a little bit of rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and go to polygons mode. I'm going to clear my UV pens, and then I'm going to use this tool. I'm going to come down to the edge of this panel, and I'm just going to rotate until it's more or less there. And I might zoom in a little bit. It looks like it's off by a hair. There we go. Still looks like it's off by a hair right now. The joy of that looks pretty good. Okay, so I've got this one selected, so I'm going to hit the letter E. I'm going to move this up here, and I'm going to say select, hide selected. Okay, so that's hidden. So now I've got all of these other polygons. Now you'll notice none of these has a hole in it. And so let's just see what happens if we start cutting corners to start to peel this object apart. Right? And so I can tell that I probably want to cut one of these corners off, and I'm not sure which one I want to start. And we may get to a point where this is really problematic, and we might want to do another frontal projection over there. In fact, I think we might want to do another frontal projection on both of these to make them a little bit cleaner. So let's go ahead and do that before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So I'm going to switch views back here. I'm going to rotate my view. I'm going to say, okay, let's take this one, and that's got Y with the Z to the left. There we go. This is the view I want. I am going to definitely select these polygons and do UF for fill and hold down Shift to select all of those polygons. And I could also, I definitely need to take at least one of these edges with me, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to my perspective view and figure out these are the ones that I definitely need to add. So I'm going to use the live selection tool and just select all of those and unselect that one and then go down to the corner. You do want to make sure you don't miss anything here. Now, I could actually just leave those edge polygons in place and they could be part of that bottom piece. I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. But maybe I will also grab these other edges here just to make life a little bit more even. Okay, so I've got all of these polygons selected. I'm going to go to the right view, and I am going to double check and make sure I didn't grab anything above that. Perfect. So now I'm going to go ahead and say projection and frontal. Right, and that's going to, you'll see it's created a new scene. It's broken that out. And again, what I'm going to want to probably do here is make sure that when I go to relax this, because if I say UV unwrap, actually that worked surprisingly well. I'm really happy with that. So I don't need to do any additional work potentially. What I am going to check is if these are pretty uniform the way they are. So what I may do, just to make sure everything's good, and I may undo this, is to do a loop selection, so UL, and zoom in some and try and loop select this edge, and then do UF, and hold down Shift, and for some reason the fill does not work in this view, so I can go back here and do the fill selection. And then if I go down to Relax UV and I uncheck Cut Selected Edges, and I check mark Pin to Neighbors, and then go to ABF and hit Apply, I might get a slight variation in this internal thing where it spreads out just a little bit. Right? That's the only fine-tuning I'm really interested in doing. These edges unfolded beautifully, and so I'm going to use the Move tool, double-click to select all of this, and then click to drag it up and out of my way, and just say Select, Hide Select. Okay, so now I've got these last few panels. And this is so rectilinear, I'm going to try this, and we're just going to see what happens. So I'm going to go down here, and it's really hard for me to determine where's that edge that I want to cut, because what I'm going to want to do is cut through all of this. I think it's out here, so I'm just going to go ahead and go to Edges mode. Notice I have no polygons selected right now, so I have to, for any of this to, for any of this to work, I'm going to need to go in and select my polygons. So I'm going to come down here, and I just want to come and start by cutting, all the way to there. And let's go ahead and just say Cut Selected Edges, uncheck Pin to Neighbors, Apply. That has actually already made a huge impact on the shape of this thing. And so now I just need to go ahead and make those cuts on the other side. So it looks like I will need to make a cut here. And so I'm going to hit Apply. That helped out a lot. I'm going to come up here to this top one. Make sure I have actually selected that. Okay. That looks really funny, and part of that is because this is not selected all the way. Oops, maybe I did something wrong. Let's step back. It looks like because of the way this is, that I've cut this apart, I'm going to need to, let's go ahead and cut this one. I'm not quite sure why there's a seam right here. Let's go ahead and apply, let's do LSC. Let's apply this. And something crazy is going on with my object, so I'm going to undo a few steps because I'm not quite sure what happened there. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually cut here. Let's just go ahead and hit apply. Okay, that was a much better result. In fact, minus this top edge up here, that's probably all I have to do. So let's come in here and we will say shift, cut all of those and apply. That cleans that up a little bit, and we'll come down to this other side and do the same thing. And you'll notice I accidentally selected another one here, so I'm going to hold down Control and get that deselected and hit apply. All right, so now, even though my object is sideways, I can come here, I can select all my polygons, and this unfolded really nicely. So I'm just going to leave that the way it is. And now it's time to rotate my tile so it's reasonably straight. Move it down so I have the bottom of the window to look at, and maybe I'll zoom in a little bit. Looks like it needs to be rotated just a hair more. There. Looks like I just need to go. That is pretty good. If it's off by a hair, nobody's really going to notice. I've got all my cuts. It's flat, it's square, it's true. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to select. And actually I still have that should be the rest of that object. So I'm going to go ahead and go to select. I'm going to go to unhide all. I am going to deselect all of my islands. And then I'm going to go to UV packing, and I've got everything set the way I want. I'm going to hit apply. Now, when I do that, one thing I do want to note is, are these all actually oriented the way I want them to be oriented? And I can look at this. This is the top. It should have done equal island size. I'm not quite sure why this is scaled up larger than this island, but it is. The only last thing to check is to make sure that the scale on all your objects matches or is reasonably close. So with these two, right, this should be about the same size as the back of the camera, so I'm going to go ahead and scale those up a little bit as well. You just want to make sure that everybody is about right. Okay, so this is about the same. Oops. These two are about the same. Now, this is that one edge. We'll see. Let's go ahead and preserve orientation and equalize island size and hit apply. And let's just see what happens. So this edge did shrink down some. All of these things changed orientation to some degree. I'm not quite exactly sure why. Let's go ahead and undo that. There we go. I unchecked equalize island size, and I actually got a much, much better result. However, this one island is enormous, right? And it should actually be about the same scale as that island over there. So I'm just going to scale it down until those two are really close in scale. And you can see that each of these is offset just a hair as well, so I could always manually adjust some of these shapes and then put them back close to where they were. Right, so that one's pretty straight and true. This one is still a little tiny bit crooked, but now I can use the edge of that other object to fix it. we go. And then this guy down here was pretty straight already, so stick on that. Okay. So we've got all those islands. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save my work. I've done all the objects now, and the last thing we need to do is bake these into a single object and then a single material. In this section of the tutorial, we are going to take this object that we've taken all the constituent parts of and created our UV maps, and we are going to join these together and then bake the texture, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. So first, what we need to do is we need to apply a different material to each one of the objects. And so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 objects. So I'm just going to copy this material 6 times to start with. So I'm going to hold down Control, click and drag once, click and drag twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, right? So I should have 5 or 6 copies. And each one of these materials I'm going to change the color on, right? So the way that this map works is there's this this gradient grid that's being blended with some base color. So we can just go to, say, a true blue here, and things are going to look a little more purple. And then what we'll do is we'll just delete the material tag off of each object and then apply the new one to that section. So there's blue. I could rename these, but I'm lazy and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make this one green. And so then I will delete the green off the flash inset object, and I'll apply that there. Oh, that's something that I failed to do in the last tutorial, but you should do on your own, is to try and unwrap that. It's kind of annoying, but give it a go. All right, so, and if not, don't worry about it. You've got the rest of the objects already unwrapped. So the lens, I'm going to go ahead and maybe, I'm not going to turn transparency on because that won't bake, but I am going to go with yellow on this. Now with baking, one of the things that happens is that this doesn't, hold on, I can't think and do materials at the same time. So see here, the round button, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to go to this next material here, and I'll make it, I have a yellow already, I have a green, maybe I'll make it like a teal. There we go. Okay. All right, so I've applied a different material to each one of these. The lens body is still the original material, which is fine. But so I have these 5 different materials, and I'm going to be joining this together. So let's go ahead and select all of our objects in our hierarchy, and right-click, and then go down to Connect Objects. I'm going to leave the other set of objects here, just because it makes it, I just don't want to delete it and then have to go back and do something. And so I always try and save things like this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, I've connected all of these, and we'll talk about what happened in a second, but first we need to hide all of this. And rather than go down and try and hide all of these objects, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Create at the top of the screen, go to Null. I'm going to call this Null, I'm just going to call it Expanded Object, right, because it's all the different parts. And I'm going to select all of those except body.1, which is the one that just was made. Make them in, put them in the expanded object, and then make it invisible by turning those 2 little dots red. Okay, so now I just have the body, and so I want you to notice that there are now 6 material tags on here, and there are all of these different polygon selections. Right? And those polygon selections are basically defining where the different materials are, and they're the different parts of the object. Right? And so I've turned this into one cohesive object. Now something, and so I've got this as a single object. So now what I need to do is I need to be able to combine all of these into one material. And so before I do that, though, I need to go back to my UV edit layout. Because right now, all the polygons are, right, all those polygons from all those materials, all the UVs are laid on top of one another, and we don't want that to happen. So what I need to do is I need to click and make sure I don't have anything selected, and I need to do UV packing again. I'm going to say preserve orientation and equalize island size, and this might take a little bit, and there we go. So now every single surface on this entire object is somewhere on the material. Now again, right, this is a little bit larger than this, but more or less these things are making a pretty good size. Okay, so we've got this set, and now what we need to do is we need to migrate this to another setting. Now, something to note is the target resolution is 1024 by 1024. And that's fine. We're gonna, we'll probably up the size of our material here in just a second. Okay, so I've got all my UVs laid out. Each one of them has a slightly different color on it. And so what I need to do is I need to come up here, and I could, with all these materials, I could turn off the blending so that it's just the true colors. And that way it's going to be more clear what's happening when we get to the surface. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I select this material and I hold down Shift and select this material, it looks like, yeah, there's multiple values in all of these, but all of this is the same, right? And so if I reduce this mixed strength to 0, then what's going to happen is I'm going to get these solid colors here, right? And so I'm going to do that so we can, so it makes it more clear when we make the changes over here what's happening. So now that I've done that, I'm going to right click on this, and what I need to do is not actually in here. So I'm going to go to the object menu, and once I go to the object menu, I thought it was on here too, but it is not. Yep. So I go to the object menu, and I'm going to go to bake object rather than bake material. So I'm going to click on bake object, and we could go ahead and bake in ambient occlusion, and we definitely want to keep our UVs. Sometimes you want to bake normals, but right now we're going to leave that as it stands. And I think that we'll just need to do, we'll want to make sure we do a single texture, and then where this width and height are, let's go ahead and make this significantly larger, right? If we do it at 512 by 512, if we end up adding any sort of text or any line art or anything on here, it's going to be pixelated when we go to render it. And so what we're going to do is we at least want it to be 2048 by 2048. Depending on what you're working on, you may want that to be higher. You typically want it to be square. And so instead of 2048, you could do 4096 or something like that, right? 1024, and there are typically multiples like that historically. You don't have to do that, but you can. But so I'm going to do that. I'm going to click bake. And when I do that, the first thing you'll see is it's baking the ambient occlusion layer. So it's going to bake that. And then once it's done, we now have this new material, which if I go back to my standard layout, where is standard? If I go back to my standard layout, you'll see there's some weirdness on here, but if I render this, right, now I've already got some shading on there from the ambient occlusion, and I've got all my materials. And so what this is, and you'll see that body.1 is now turned off as well. It automatically hides it. So this is the object that I'm working with. And if I look at this material and I double click over here, you'll see that the this one texture now has all of these different colors laid out in different places. Right? And this has set me up to then go forward from UV edit and go into body paint. And so that's the next thing that we will work on in the next set of tutorials. Go ahead and save this and be done.